Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 114 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me, and tonight we're going to recap some of the big games over the last week. We had a doubleheader at the Champions Classic on Tuesday, and then we had another doubleheader last night between, two unrelated games, but some great ones. We even had some good ones last weekend. Feast Week is coming up. That'll be a different video. But, Mike, let's start this one off with what has started many college basketball seasons, at least in our watching lifetime. It is not anymore, now sort of week 3, and that's the Champions Classic. This year played at Madison Square Garden. It will be back at the United Center next year. And it's been the same 4 teams for as long as I can remember, Mike. It used to be sort of the opening night of hoops. Then a couple of years ago it was pushed to week 2. This year back to week 3. And game 1 there was one between Michigan State and Kentucky. Michigan State coming in off that big win over Arkansas at home. Kentucky coming in off their first loss. And Michigan State sort of ran them out of the gym. Hit a bunch of threes in the first half, built a big lead by 17, and then sort of saw the game out from there. But Mike, with obviously Michigan State's been impressive, but a lot of the storylines from here are coming around or that are going around are about Kentucky. It just doesn't seem like they're as connected as they were last year.
Yeah, absolutely. This was an interesting game, mostly in regards to Michigan State making 11 of 22 threes. This is a team that in this season has shot under 20% from the three-point line. Most games making maybe one or two threes. So this was very surprising to see that they are lighting it up from behind the arc. And to me, I think it's very clear that Kentucky's game plan going into this game was to let them shoot the three. And that really backfired on Mark Pope's squad. And by the time they tried to tweak things, it was too little, too late. But it was clear that Mark Pope wanted his team to allow them to shoot the three, and it really backfired. Now, in terms of Kentucky not being connected, I think there's certainly something to do with that. They only scored 66 points in this game. They only shot 23% from three-point range and 35% from the field. So, a lot of new faces, but you would have expected OA to have a little bit more of a presence in this game. So, is it, more encouraging for Michigan State or more concerning for Kentucky? Yeah, I don't know. I really like Michigan State, though. After seeing this, we talked about them at length last week. This is a team that appears now that they can beat you in more ways than one. You look at it on the other side, though, Kentucky, this is a very concerning, not the fact that they lost, but the fact that they lost, they got run out of the gym and it was never even close.
Yep. Michigan State, it's been known over the past couple of years that they haven't really used the transfer portal as much as they probably could have. They've added here and there. They haven't completely forgotten about it. So they've had a pretty similar team over the years. It seems like those players are still developing within the program. And then the new pieces are all contributing for Michigan State this year. Trey Fort, their one transfer, 13 points. Then you have Cam Ward, who's a freshman off their bench, 8 and 4 in 18 minutes. And then Kerr Tang, who is a sophomore. It wasn't really a part of the rotation last year. He's taken a big step with double digits in his last 2 games. So, Michigan State won the Big Ten by multiple games last year. And they're bringing most of those players back, plus a few more role players that are
Yeah.
doing their job. Like, this formula is going to work. They're really good at defense. They don't have to shoot 35 threes a game like some of these other teams do. And, this was sort of over pretty quickly. But then on
Yeah.
Kentucky's side, or go ahead, Mike.
It feels like year after year, Michigan State keeps getting disrespected in the preseason. They're not supposed to amount to much. Last year, they didn't have a whole lot of great expectations. They ran away with regular season Big Ten, given it was an off year for the Big Ten last year. But with that being said, it just seems like Izzo's team, even though he's been there for so long, is continuing to shatter expectations.
Yeah, they've always loaded their non-con, and they've taken some hits early in the year.
Yeah.
And then they've sort of gone under the radar. You know what? Maybe this team's actually good, and then you creep up the rankings. But in the age of the portal, they're going to be closer to their finished product than some of these other teams are early in the season. They certainly are here. I think good things are ahead for them. On Kentucky's side, Mike, there's some really concerning quotes coming out of there, especially from Mark Pope. He's like, you know, it you don't expect him to be sort of so like disappointed with a November loss, and
Yeah.
like he's already questioning like the culture of his team, not directly, but it seems like he's doing that without doing it directly. They are down a few players. Jalon Lowe is out and Jaden Quaintance is out. They should make a difference, especially in that minus 14 rebounding deficit for Quaintance. But, they were sort of not really the mid-major all-star team last year. They had a lot of them. It seemed like all of them really bought into Kentucky and bought into their roles. And I don't know if that's happening again this year. It just seems like something's a little bit off. And when you play a schedule like the Wildcats do, you're gonna get found out. Like they lost on the road at Louisville and to Michigan State on a neutral, not bad losses at all. But the fact that they really sort of had a heroic comeback to make that a single-digit loss at Louisville, and then 17 to Michigan State here, it definitely looks like they're a tier below where we probably thought they were.
Yeah, and like you said, I think losing to Louisville in a highly contested, really hostile environment is not necessarily bad. The fact that they were losing by 15 points most of this game is very concerning. But then following it up with this performance where they just get just waxed on a neutral court is very concerning for Mark Pope's squad. And I think expectations for the Wildcats, and maybe even the SEC in general, are going pretty far down the toilet right now, with the exception of one school, and we'll get to them in a little bit.
Yeah, for Kentucky, the rest of the non-con is North Carolina at Rupp in the ACC SEC Challenge. Then they play Gonzaga in Nashville. It says
Yeah,
Music City Madness, but
yeah, it's in Nashville,
it
Firstone
says this
Arena.
game's at Rupp Arena, so on ESPN. So I think it's in
You're
Nashville.
wrong.
I think that's a
It's in
mistake.
Nashville.
Yeah, so that's probably going to be a home game for them. They host Indiana at Rupp, and then they play St. John's in Atlanta. So like four really good games for them. Um, and then they start off SEC play with a trip to Alabama. So the clock might be ticking on time for them to figure it out, because like you said, Mike, you can't sort of bludgeon your way to 11-8 or 11-7 in the SEC and get like a top protected seed this year. I think you might need to be a little bit further away from that 500 mark.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's go to game 2 at the Champions Classic in New York, and it was between John Shire and Duke and Bill Self in Kansas. Darren Peterson did not play for Kansas in this one. It seems like this hamstring injury is certainly lingering more than basically anybody thought. But Mike, on the other hand, I did think Kansas actually battled in this one. Duke is a really
Yeah,
complete team, and they ended up winning by 12, but that was my takeaway.
yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as a moral victory in college basketball. But you look at Kansas competed coming down the stretch; they were within 3 points, I think, with 5 minutes to go, and they just didn't close coming down the stretch. But we said at the start of the season that if Kansas didn't have Darian Peterson, they wouldn't be able to compete much with anybody that was competing for a national championship, much less maybe not anybody in the top 25. They competed with Duke, and they competed at a very high level. Look, Duke's proven themselves to be one of the best teams in college basketball early on this year. They've played up in New York already this year. When they played up at West Point, that was kind of a funny one. They had that good early game against Texas to kind of get their feet under them. This is a complete Duke basketball team, and Kansas was able to get a lot more production from some key players in this game. Look, I think a big one that they're going to continue to struggle with, as they did in this game, was the rebound differential. Minus 11 on the boards for the Jayhawks is a little concerning, and that's where they're going to need to get some more production, especially with Darian Peterson being out for potentially a couple more weeks with that hamstring. They're going to need to get that development. With that being said, their backcourt performed pretty well in this game without him. Trey White, 22 points in this game. The senior from Dallas clearly had, was ready to take the spotlight. Also had 9 rebounds, so it was 1 rebound short of a double double. So a very impressive game for the backcourt minus Peterson for Kansas.
Yeah, they competed in this one. I think to me, the main takeaway here was at least Kansas is going to make the tournament. Like,
Yeah,
they really went shot for shot with a top 5 team on a neutral court that was probably a little bit more leaning towards Duke. I mean, there's a reason why Duke goes to Madison Square Garden a lot. But But Council is a guy who I saw play at Wagner for a couple of years, and it's amazing. He was like their small ball four there, and he obviously makes a jump up to Bonaventure, and now at Kansas where he's like the point guard. Um, he hasn't been as consistent as he was in that one. He started to find his shot a little bit. Trey White, like the pieces do add up if you have Peterson at the top of the line here, um, and maybe this is good for them long term that they're going to have to find a way to compete without him. Because in that North Carolina game, when he went out with 2 fouls, they were 20 points worse than the Tar Heels. In this one, you really weren't. So I think there's been some growth for Kansas, and all the updates around Peterson and Bill Self, they've been extremely odd. Bill Self is not somebody that sounds very unsure of himself very often,
Yeah.
and he has said about 14 different cliches for Peterson's injury. I think the most recent one was he's out for the immediate future. That was before this game. So what does
That's
that
an
mean?
interesting statement.
Does
Yeah.
that mean he's going to come back in January? Does that mean he's going to come back against in Vegas when they play 3 times in potentially 3 days? I'm sure the other starters would like that. But yeah, interesting situation there in Lawrence.
Yeah, absolutely. And with hamstrings, you just never know how long that can last. Hamstring can be one of those things where you could be back next week. You could take you 6 to 8 weeks to heal. I know from experience, unfortunately. So with Peterson, it certainly could be a long time that Kansas could be without him. And they've got a tough schedule, like you said, playing in Vegas 3 times. They've also got to play NC State. They've got to play UConn. They've got to play Syracuse. They've got to play Missouri and Notre Dame. So they're playing mostly Power Five programs the rest of their out of conference before they get into the Big 12. So they need him back, and they need him back quickly.
And we'll have to see. Players era previews coming soon, but um, you know Syracuse and Notre Dame there. You'd think that they win both those, and then they get potentially a really good team in that game 3. We'll go over how that all works. I'm not sure anybody really knows,
I
because
don't.
it's like goal differential and soccer and points scored
Yeah.
and all that. But we'll figure that out when it comes. All right, Mike. Let's turn the calendar to Wednesday. Another huge non-conference doubleheader. Really good for the sport that Tuesday and Wednesday was dominated by college
Yeah.
basketball. Let's go to the Gamble Pavilion on the campus of UConn. It's where Tommy Lloyd and Arizona went in to play Dan Hurley and the Huskies. And UConn down a couple of players. Terrace Reed did not play. Braylon Mullins still out. Um, but it's Arizona that goes in there and gets the victory, 71-67. It was a game where Arizona, I wouldn't say dominated, but they did control a majority of this one until sort of a late push from UConn, and they actually found themselves with the lead with just a few
Yeah.
minutes left. But Tommy Lloyd and Arizona close the door and pick up what is their third, in all likelihood, quad one win of the year. I was pretty impressed with both teams in this one.
Yeah, I think this is these two games, this one and the one we're talking about next, arguably the two best signature wins that we've seen in this young season in college basketball. We're talking about going onto the road into a tough place against the number 3 team in the country in UConn and walking away with the win. A game that they dominated for what 35 minutes of this game, 3 minutes before it got close at the end. UConn certainly had their chances, and Hurley, he made it known in the press conference afterwards that he felt like his team blew it. But at the end of the game, at the end of the day, kudos to UConn for competing, especially with significantly fewer players on the floor. The big issue I think right now for UConn is Caravan is just not giving the production that he needs to this year, especially coming off of a really good year last year. He got absolutely bodied by Koa Pete in this game. Koa Pete, absolutely dominant freshman, 16 points, 12 boards in this game. Caravan continued to get blocked. He was having a hard time getting shots off and only finished the game with 8 points, turned the ball over a couple times. He really struggled, and that's something that UConn's going to need to work on with their bigs going forward. Arizona has incredible bigs. And talking about this earlier, Jaden Bradley on top of Koa Pete being Koa Pete, as good as he's been this year, Jaden Bradley's that senior presence that's been on Arizona's team for a while now and is able to lead his team to victory here. 21 points in this game of 9 boards. This is why, Sean, we were really high on Arizona going into the year, is that they have these guys that are, phenomenal freshmen. Koa Pete's going to be a lottery pick. We've also got experienced seniors that are really, really talented on this team. So they continue to prove us right, and this was arguably the most impressive win of the season so far for Arizona or anyone in the country.
Yeah, this was the second straight game for Arizona that Jaden Bradley closed.
Yeah,
And, you know, there's some signs of Walter Clayton in there. And he took two games which were extremely even and, without a doubt gave Arizona the victory. If you're in close games and you're leaving yourself open to a 3 going in, that can happen. Not here, or against UCLA, or against Florida, I believe, who they played in the opening day. But yeah, 3 quad 1 wins already, and you'd have to think, Mike, that there's a good chance that all of those stay in quad 1A, which
yes,
the neutral wins between UCLA and Florida, they would have to stay in the top 25 for that to happen. You would think that that's certainly likely, and then, you know, away games top 75 are quad 1, so half of that UConn's certainly going to stay in that too. And this was also at their on-campus arena, which I don't have any data to back it up, but they're much better there than when they go to Hartford to play at the arena that has a new name. It used to be the XL Center.
it's not the XL anymore. Yeah,
It's like 40 minutes. I mean, it's fine. You know, they have a great home crowd there, but it's just different when it's on campus. But yeah, they went into Gamble and joined a pretty short list of non-conference teams to go in there and win. I think it's only 9 or 10 names long, and most of those haven't happened since the '80s. But really, really
yeah.
impressive from Arizona, Mike, and the team that does hold the number 1 spot is playing now and will have a potentially big game tomorrow. But do you think Arizona could take that number 1 spot?
Absolutely. They're going to get a considerable amount of votes going into next week, and they have a pretty quiet feast week. They play Denver next week, and that's really it for them. They get to chill on Thanksgiving week. But so they could fall out of that position the following week, but then they get right back into it and they play Auburn, who's looked a lot better since that first game that we saw them, and we thought that this team might be really bad. They've looked a lot better since then, and then they've got to play Alabama in Birmingham, one of those quote unquote neutral site games. It's not really a neutral site, so they're going to have their opportunities to cement themselves as the number 1 team in the country in a couple weeks. They're certainly going to get some votes come Monday. I just don't know if they're going to be able to have much to sustain that going into the following week since they're not really doing anything feast week.
Yep, they're certainly the top of the pile for tournament resume as of now. It's really hard to do it when teams only played 4 or 5 games. I'll probably get one out after Feast Week. But yeah, they're certainly top of the line for me. Mike, UConn did lose this game at home on Wednesday. We're going to go back to Saturday, and they did pick up a pretty good win here against BYU on the Boston Celtics floor in Boston. And going back to that Arizona game for a second, I don't know if I've ever seen Dan Hurley so content after a loss. I think he was pretty proud of that game, being that he was down a couple players and being
Yeah,
how like -20 in rebounds, and you were right there with potentially the best team in the country. Like, I think
absolutely.
with the BYU
He's
victory on Saturday and a pretty good effort on Wednesday, I think he knows that this team is really, really good.
Absolutely. He knows that. And he know like you could tell Hurley's a really bad loser.
Yeah.
We know that pretty clearly. He was very calm in his press conference. Obviously, he was, lamenting some of the missed opportunities they had coming down the stretch. But Hurley was in very good spirits for a loss. Arguably, haven't seen him in better spirits other than, winning against a good team. So 100%. And you looked at the way they played against BYU. This was a phenomenal game, and,
Yeah.
and this was another one of those where it's basically a UConn home game. There's not a whole lot of BYU fans that live in Boston, Massachusetts. It's a few thousand miles away from home for them, but uh, it's still a great performance. I think they had some really good defensive stops at the end. BYU made this look closer than it was coming down the stretch, but this was UConn's game, and then it caused a turnover by Robert Wright the third at the end. Um, Not worth $44 million if you ask me right now for Brigham Young, but neither here nor there. And UConn was the better team, right, against BYU.
And I you'll have to remind me on this, Mike. I believe this is the return of a neutral game in Vegas last year or Salt Lake. These they did, or that's next year. They did an
I think it's
agreement.
next year.
I
Yeah, I
think
think
they're
that's next
going
year.
to another
So
pretend neutral
it's I
game.
think they're going to Salt Lake next year.
Yeah. So and again, this is how they sort of get around that. Top 25 for a home quad one game, top
Yeah.
50 on a neutral. But this one was really, I think, knowing that this happened on Saturday, I think you can live with a really tough, gutsy, close loss here on Wednesday if you're UConn. They do need their guys back, and um, I think that they're going to get them pretty soon. Terrace Reed did play in this win against on Saturday, which the box score is taking its sweet time to load for me here, but he seems like he's close. And then Mullins too, who is probably the best shooter, like pure scorer on this team. Um, like I think they're fine, and the pieces seem to fit. They have Demery, Malachi Smith is a good guard off the bench. You have Eric Reeby, who's a pretty good center, hit a three. Like this UConn team to me is really really close to the top in a significant upgrade from last year. And the only other thing for them, Mike, is that with how down the Big East is, like the rest of their non-conference is super important.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
they have Illinois
100%.
at Madison Square Garden on Black Friday, and then I believe they have Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse, Florida at Madison Square Garden, Texas at home, and then Big East play starts. So they're going to have to probably win all but one of those to stay in the conversation for like a number one seed, just because it looks like that there might be two good chances for a win in Big East play.
Yeah, they'll also get a game against Texas in December as well. But when you're looking at the Big East play, I don't know if you've got another top 25 team in the Big East right now.
Yep.
Right?
Maybe
Georgetown,
St.
I will say,
John's.
maybe, yeah, you're right. St. John's and maybe Georgetown.
Yeah.
Georgetown has been pretty solid this year. They had a good preseason win before we started this season against Kentucky as well. So Georgetown might also be a good team, but you're not going to get a whole lot of chances to pick off ranked wins, especially wins on the road. They do get to play St. John's on the road, but yeah, UConn is going to have to make use of these, and it's a good thing that they've stacked their out of conference this year. Like you said, three teams that are currently in the top eight, four in the top 10 is a great setup for them. But they're going to have to do something in this out of conference in order to get, a two or even a one seed.
And they already have a pretty nice win against the top 10 team on a neutral. So I
Yeah.
think if they win, let's say 3 out of those 4 tough games, then they'll be in pretty good shape. But you'd have to think, like, even their national championship teams have lost 3 games in the Big East at least. Like one year they're 14-6, the other year 17-3. Like 15-5, 16-4 is a really good season. They're probably going to take some losses to some non-tournament teams, um, but it seems like if they can win a couple of these, maybe even one of those road games, yeah, that road game at Kansas, that would go a long way for them.
A long way.
All right, Mike, let's go
Illinois
to
game would be huge still.
this big second game here on Wednesday night, and that was at the United Center in Chicago between Alabama and Illinois. This was a game that was, it's going to say N on the team sheet for neutral, but there was like Illinois graphics and ads and stuff. This was an Illinois home game by everything that matters except for the committee, and Alabama went in there and won. It was a game that was pretty
Yeah.
close throughout. Alabama did pull ahead a little bit in the second half. It looked like they wanted to go for a kill shot. That didn't really come, but they were still able to close pretty solidly and pick up a really, really good win.
Yeah, so just for context for our listeners, so Illinois plays a home game every single year at the United Center. It's a home game. I think it's always considered neutral court. Usually they play like University of Illinois Chicago or a
Yeah.
not very good team. This year their game at the United Center was against the Alabama Crimson
I
Tide.
think they're playing
Hey,
Northwestern there, too.
that would
Yeah.
make sense. That actually might be a Northwestern home game.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
Oddly enough, because Northwestern's in Chicago. Uh, Champagne's about 2.5 hours outside. But, nevertheless, this was a very surprising, I think, outcome for me. Look, Illinois, they looked pretty good in the first, they looked really good in the first half of this one, but they were unable early in the second half to really get any scoring in. And you're going to look at the score and you're going to see that Illinois had 86 points in this game and say that this was, an offensive battle. And to a degree it was. But Alabama's defense, if you actually watch the tape, was so impressive, closing out guys that were driving, containing the Fighting Illini, forcing them to take really tough and bad shots, even at times. They really did a good job. And look, Illinois scored a lot of points in the last 2.5 minutes in this game.
Yeah.
I think they only had about 70 points with 2.5 minutes to go.
It looked like it
Two
was going to be a
minutes
game in the
40.
70s.
Yeah, it really did. And then there was a lot of scoring at the end when Illinois was just running down the court with Boswell and chucking up a layup and it would somehow go in. Um, with that being said, I think Illinois had a lot of unforced errors in this game. It seemed like they kept letting themselves back into the game and they kept shooting themselves in the foot with a lot of mental errors. It could have been that they were, terrible from the free throw line in this game. I think they were like 53% from the field or from the free throw line, but then it was also, you're down by two. Alabama is shooting for a one and one, and they miss it, but it's a lane violation. Alabama gets the ball, gets their next two, right? It was just so many mental errors for the University of Illinois in this game that it made it tough to win this game. And I don't want to discredit Alabama because they were 100% the best team that was out there. They got a lot of good production from Keaton Bristow. It was a transfer from Tarleton State. This was his first game
Yeah.
due to injury for
He
the
missed
Tide. And in
he
this
missed
game,
that Purdue game, which was big in them losing the rebounding battle, and that's why
yeah,
here it was pretty close.
yeah. And in this game, he only played 19 minutes because, he's still trying to get his feet under him. 10 points, 8 rebounds, almost a double-double in his first game here. He's going to be a big part of this team going forward and their success. You have to think that you're going to get a lot more production and he might even enter into the starting lineup. So, look, Alabama is exceeding our expectations for sure, going way above and beyond what we expected them to go so far this season. If not for that loss to Purdue, they'd probably be ranked in the top five next week. They lost that game to a really good Purdue team, so they're not. But they're going to have their opportunities come next week in Vegas as well.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Alabama here. I was still a little bit impressed with Illinois. Like, they made some adjustments in this game, which helped. They were sort of falling into the trap of taking the shots that Alabama wanted them to. Like,
Yeah,
the way Alabama plays defense is they give up a lot of, like, easier twos. Like, they want you to take tougher contested twos, even if those are at the rim. And, like, Illinois was running into them and then taking some contested threes. This is not going to be a 35 3-point attempts a game team in Illinois. They're pretty good in the ISO, especially Stojakovic. They figured that out now in the second half of both of their big games against Texas Tech and Illinois. He's a real problem one-on-one. And then you
yeah.
have some other guys like Boswell who,
Boswell had 20 points in the second half.
yeah.
Almost all of them were going ISO.
But, yeah, so that's the one-on-one style that Illinois has sort of played like over the years, not in a good way. I think they have to get back to
No,
that here. And for Alabama, I think Alabama is what they are. They're a little better than we thought, but their sort of formula is going to be the same. They're probably going to lose some games, but it's going to take like a pretty good all-around effort to do so. You're going to have to probably make 13 or 14 threes. You're not going to be able don't turn the ball over 10 times to get them in transition, make your free throws. Like, there is a formula to beat them. It's just really hard to find it. And in Alabama's 3 big games this year against probably 3 top 15 teams, they've won 2 of them, and for all intents and purposes, 2 road wins. So
yeah.
they've been impressive, and Mike, with where the SEC is at, they might be the best team in that league right now.
I think they absolutely are the best team in the SEC right now. And I think another reason that they are one of the best teams is you looked at this game against Illinois, Big Ten known for some physical basketball. Alabama absolutely won the physicality match against Illinois. It kind of, bit them in the heels coming down the stretch because they had numerous guys in foul trouble. And that's kind of what led Illinois to getting back in the game. Um, but at the end of the day, they were way more physical in the Fighting Illini. It led to a lot more contested shots. And look, I'll be honest. I don't know if Illinois, and I know they shot pretty poorly from the 3-point line, but I don't know if they were going to score any more points in this game
Yeah.
because they
No.
took so many contested twos. And look, good for them. A lot of them went in, actually.
Yeah.
There were a lot of tough shots that Illinois got to fall, but I was really impressed by Alabama defensively in this game, despite giving up 86 points.
Yeah, like the way Alabama plays offense, they don't have to be amazing at defense. They just have to be
Yeah.
good enough. And if you take, 14 tough twos and you make 7 of them, they're going to take 1 point per possession. Like that,
Yeah.
they're going to win if you do that. So, will there be a day where a team goes, 10 of 14 on tough twos and they're going to win? Obviously, to a bigger scale, but probably. But more times than not, you're going to miss a lot of twos. In this game, I think 34% for Illinois, like maybe they make one more on average. And then for Alabama, they were 13 of 36 at 36%. That's probably about their average, too, in terms of
Yeah.
volume and percentage. So both these teams are really good. I think Illinois, this loss is easier to take for them, like UConn, because they just beat Texas Tech last week, and Texas Tech is really good. So,
Yeah.
this was the first real game, Mike, that the Big Ten has lost in the non-con where you thought they had a really
Yeah.
good chance to win. Still think the Big Ten is probably in the best spot right now in terms of how the non-con is going. The Big 12 is just a little bit behind, but yeah, Alabama might be the top of the SEC with them playing a little better than we thought, and then some of the teams at the top maybe not being as consistent as we thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to also say, really, I think what Illinois fans will be frustrated about is the mental errors in this game.
Yeah, you
You
can't do
know,
that against Alabama.
if Illinois goes 17 of 22 from free throw line, this is a completely different game. That's a very average free throw shooting percentage. All right. If they're not committing lane violations in with 2.5 minutes to go in this game, it's a different ballgame.
Yep, 20,
And that's
20
what I
of
think.
51 on twos. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's going to be better offensive outputs from Illinois for sure.
And they'll be better. They're going to have plenty more opportunities this season against UConn and Tennessee in the out of conference before they, can get to the Big Ten, which is going to be a tough fight this year.
So, Mike, let's end it here. Obviously, those are some of the big games over the past week. Plenty more happened. Arkansas almost lost to Winthrop. Double text with
Yeah.
10 seconds left. Arkansas gets out of there unscathed. We had a couple other close games. But we're going to leave it here for now. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.